This is Stan Farnsworth at NextFlex, and today on our podcast, Electronics at the Edge, we are talking about inside NextFlex with innovation, collaboration, and impact. And our guest today is Dr. Scott Miller. Hi, Scott. Tell us about yourself.
Hey, Stan. So I'm the director of technology at NextFlex. I've been doing this role for about 8.5 years and been working in the field of hybrid electronics since my PhD work more than 25 years ago.
So you've been with NextFlex for 8.5 years. How has your role and perspective shifted over that period of time? I know NextFlex has gone through some evolution during that time.
Yeah, we've had a lot of evolution in that time. I like to tell people that when we started off, the first question that we would get from people was, can hybrid electronics do such and such, whatever it is they're interested in doing? And then over time, it shifted from, can you do it, to, is it manufacturable? And then from there, it shifted to, can you do it with all the reliability and the standards and those things that you need to really begin to really mass deploy the technologies. So that has also resulted in a shift in the way that we think about a lot of this, in terms of, we're still developing the technology and advancing, in the field of electronics, you can never stop doing that. So we're still doing that, but we're thinking a lot more about how do we take these technologies that exist, that we have developed, where we have developed that manufacturing technology. How do we take that and transition that out into the field? How do we make sure that it's getting into more products and doing so in a more visible way? Because let's face it, hybrid electronics is in a lot of products today. How do we get it out there, make it more visible, and especially for things like program sponsors, help them to see what that capability is? So we're talking a lot more about things like technology transitions and insertion today than we did before. And that's also shifted the way we think about partnering.
And so when we think about electronics is a pretty broad topic. When we say hybrid electronics, what are we talking about?
So when we talk about hybrid electronics, we really mean combining additively manufactured electronics, what some people refer to as printed electronics, with electronics assembly. So it's not purely printed where you print everything. And I don't know, 30 years ago, people thought, a lot about that. And that was considered the future. We're going to print all the transistors. But the reality is you really can't compete for general applications with silicon and microfabricated semiconductor devices. You can't do that with the printed side of the world. But printing brings along a lot of capabilities that you just can't do with those conventional electronics fabrication methodologies. And so when you combine those two worlds together, and you have those conventional discrete components and ICs and whatnot, you combine that with the additively fabricated, the printed or otherwise additively fabricated elements, you start to make electronics that just can take on new form factors. And as a result of that, they can bring new function or improve existing function.
Think about that position is that hybrid electronics is absolutely not competing or attempting to replace more traditional electronics capabilities and technologies. Those capabilities have been refined over the last 40, 50 years, all the way from through-hole, SMT, different forms of solder. These are components, supply chains, ecosystems, technologies that are well refined, reliable. There's a lot of data around the use of those technologies. Obviously, a lot of incumbent supply chain, production, design capability. Hybrid electronics is really additive to that, adding capabilities and extending the ability to use those technologies into new areas.
Yeah, that's right. If you have if you have an application for which the conventional printed circuit board you've been using meets absolutely all of your requirements, and you don't have some way to improve it, then we may not have a reason to step into that space. But if you have, you have structure that you'd like to make better use of, you've got some curved spaces that you'd like to be able to fit those electronics into, or you want a more organic form for the product that you're building, or maybe you need to take weight out or just come up with an alternative manufacturing method because there's a challenge of integrating a particular part, defects that need to be repaired, for example, in the manufacturing to improve yield. These are all areas where hybrid electronics can step in and really fill a void. So we're complementary to those existing manufacturing approaches, and we can, like I said, we can build with different form factors and then allow new function to come in because of that.
So how does NextFlex act as an agent to pull these elements together? So when we think about existing manufacturing entities, when we think about the variety of new technologies that are part of additive hybrid electronics, when we think about users, designers, how does NextFlex pull these together? What is NextFlex doing around?
It's interesting. We're trying to do several things at the same time. We really want to make sure that we are pushing this technology forward so that we can solve the problems that people are looking to solve with it. But we want to do that at the same time that we're growing out the industrial base, the manufacturing base in the US, to be able to compete with other nations for manufacturing this, and just to be able to compete with not being able to manufacture it at all. And then, of course, to do that, you need the workforce that's going to actually do that design work, the manufacturing, and the development. So we're advancing all of those things together. A big part of the way we do all of those is by really coalescing the community that's involved in this development. And we think about that across the entire supply chain. So it can't just be the companies that are going to do the manufacturing of those end products, because obviously they need to have access to the materials and the components and the tools that are going to do that. And so we pull together all of those partners across an entire supply chain, including the hardware, the software, the components, the materials, the manufacturing systems, all of that together, have everybody look at that field collectively, each bringing their own unique perspectives, their own ideas. They don't have to all agree with us, but we can at least share information with each other and then make our own decisions on the basis of that common understanding. And so NextFlex serves that role to bring those folks together and to kind of pull out that information so that we can develop a common understanding and then share that information out with the community.
So what are some modes or venues or mechanisms that we do that? What are some very specific things? I know that we've got member meetings from time to time. We've got our website, which is always being updated. What are some things that you see as being most important for convening these elements together?
Sure. So we do a lot of things within our consortium activities, of course, like you've described, some of the workshops and whatnot, where we get people together. We just did one of those a few weeks ago, looking at aerospace and automotive applications in hybrid electronics. We do a bunch of webinars. In fact, we just launched a webinar series, announced it 2 days ago, on AI for hybrid electronics, and seeing the ways that AI tools are going to change hybrid electronics design. How are they going to change manufacturing, materials development, qualification? Just to name a few of the areas. Bringing people together in physical settings and in virtual settings. But then we also have the technical community that we've built around this topic, where we have 11 technical working groups that bring together the subject matter experts to really look at, what does the field look like within their aspect of the field, map it out for the future, and develop a 5-year roadmap. And then we update those every year. And that's a critical part of how we really are just identifying and shaping the future, but helping to get all those vectors pointed in the same direction so we can be more productive together.
Flex is not Yeah, so
Like,
NextFlex is not specifically uh, a an observation-oriented group. This is a participation-oriented group. We really like people to participate in the working groups, contribute into the workshops that we have. How do we go about encouraging people to participate with us?
So every chance we get, we invite our members to participate in those groups. So, we'll highlight the activities that they have going on. In a lot of cases, somebody will come to us with a question. Maybe we can provide the answer. Maybe we can connect them with the people that can. But then seeing that, okay, that's the type of question they have, we'll get them introduced to the technical working groups. One of the things I love about those working groups is that different members will have representatives in the groups for different reasons. In many cases, the people that are there are subject matter experts. They're the ones who are bringing a lot of the information that helps us to do those road mapping activities, for example, or to make decisions on projects. But in other cases, you have somebody who's relatively newer to the field. They may have just joined a new company, or they may be asked to take on some additional responsibilities in a new area within their company or their university. And so they get involved, and they have the chance to sit at the table with people who've been doing this for 20 or 30 years and are some of the world's leading experts in the space. And they've all got an equal voice. We're all coming in with our different perspectives and can, contribute the pieces that we see. So you may have that person who comes in who doesn't have, let's pick our materials technical working group, for example. They may not have a deep background in materials development, but they may know full well the challenge that they're having in their manufacturing operation, or they just materials not functioning the way they need it to, or the way they want it to, or they're not getting the properties. And so they can lay out essentially an objective or a requirement that now the community, if everybody kind of agrees, like, yeah, this is an important need and a bunch of us are experiencing that, now that's that opportunity that might motivate some of our member companies to go and develop a product to solve that.
So something else that's interesting about NextFlex to me is in addition to the really broad scope of involvement from a supply chain, value chain perspective, materials innovation, all the way through to end users, Something that's interesting about NextFlex to me is that we also include the academic elements, the government elements, as well as the commercial industry elements. What do you see as some of the interesting benefits that we have from bringing these different perspectives? And oftentimes, these are groups with different ideal outcomes, right? How do we bring those together?
It's a great question. If you think about like the academic institutions, for example, a lot of academic researchers focus on basic science, basic engineering research, which may be use inspired, but it may be really just, focused on developing new learning and understanding of the world. Within the folks that we really work with, though, it tends to be much more application driven. There's a particular problem that needs to be solved. And so if you're an academic researcher that, has that kind of bent, and that's the kind of the world that you live in, getting connected to those problems that companies are having in the space, that the people who are applying that technology have in the space, is an absolutely vital element of what you do to stay focused on the right work. And so that's say one aspect. Sticking with the academic side of things for a minute, though, there are lots of problems that we've identified within our community that have kind of near-term solutions that we need to develop, but also the longer-term solutions where we say this problem really needs work that's going to go back to an earlier technology readiness level. It's a more basic science or basic or applied science problem than it is a development problem. And so we can take that learning that we have out of the community and push it back up to the research community that can then work on developing solutions, that are going to come years down the road, but really have a huge impact on this field. Having the government side involved, that's a huge benefit to us as well, because traditionally there's a large amount of the research funding and development funding that goes in to technology advancement comes from government. We work a lot with the Department of Defense, but also with the Departments of Energy and the National Science Foundation, Department of Commerce. And so having all these different perspectives and different objectives from a government side is really important to us as well. Partly just about having different perspectives and more information. The more information we have, the better we can focus on the most important problems. But also we can make sure that we're bringing in that one more level of need identification into the space. And since we are trying to solve things so broadly, the technology, the manufacturing, and the workforce all together, it really is a multifaceted problem that takes a lot of perspectives to be able to get it right. Not just the solutions, but the problems even.
Something that strikes me from time to time, or pretty often actually, is we tend to live. People tend to live in zones associated with their work groups, with their immediate colleagues, and it can be harder sometimes to step outside of that and get additional perspective. I think something that NextFlex is really good at is helping people get access to different related, interested elements still within that hybrid electronics ecosystem. And so bringing together government participants to be able to provide access and facilitate engagement with the academic and commercial communities and apply that to each of the different elements is a really key role. We have a pretty broad network individually and through NextFlex to be able to reach out and help with answers, to be able to reach out and provide to different needs that we hear that come across what we're doing at NextFlex. And I think that that's a really unique element that I know I get a lot of satisfaction with being able to make those connections. I know you make quite a few of those as well.
That is certainly something that I enjoy about my job tremendously is, you have a conversation with somebody in the morning and then, by coincidence in the afternoon, you're in a conversation where somebody's who probably never would have run into that person you talk to in the morning asks a related question and you make that connection. Hopefully you help them to find some common solutions. That's the even better case, of course. One of the other things that's really fulfilling as well is that we're helping to identify the problems that need to be solved, and we're helping to figure out how they might be solved. But we also get to participate in the solution space in a lot of different ways. So whether that's through being fortunate enough to have access to some government funding that we can then turn around to address those problems through our project call process, which is a huge amount of fun for us and really, impactful in terms of the outcomes that it pushes. And we should talk about that. But then also with our team, in our fab and engineering area that can, goes in and solves some of the problems, tests out some of the solutions that other people have developed, and then and makes those solutions available to the industry and to government, as needed through our facility and our capabilities internally. I think it's a really important piece that kind of ties it all together in the end, so that what gets developed becomes accessible, and then we help to transition, say, manufacturing technologies out into the contract manufacturers and captive manufacturing in U.S. companies.
So NextFlex is very unusual in the scope of equipment and capabilities it has in-house, with the technology team that we have in-house and with close access to be able to pull these elements together. I know that implementation successes that I've been a part of in my hybrid printed electronics past typically are successful not because of any one technology element. It's because of the materials and the equipment and the process development and working with the customers on the end use application all have to tie in together. And that's something that I know we have at NextFlex, and that's a service that we offer to external groups, startups, all the way up to major companies to come in and work with that. What are some types of engagements that you see come in? What types of groups contact us? How do we work with them to help them move forward?
The fact that we can do anything from, say, material evaluation and qualification to first of a kind prototype development and manufacturing, all the way out to that low rate initial production and lots of things that are in between there. Um, that alone is a pretty unique capability to have that all under one roof. But the idea that in addition, our goal is not necessarily that we want to be the end manufacturer, say contract manufacturer for a customer, but we're going to call it a success if something grows to the point that it has to move out of our facility, and then we'll actually help to effect that move from our facility where we're doing the, production run of 10,000 out to a contract manufacturer that is going to help take it to that next scale. When they need it to be a product that they're going to be, putting out there and selling, maybe we'll do that transition much earlier. We make the first 5 and then, help to move it to somebody who's going to build, the next 100. So that's, being able to do that is really, I think kind of unique in terms of the kind of products. So, it's everything from, wearable medical devices, with our FDA good manufacturing practices compatibility, to the sensing systems for the warfighter that can go out and either say look at physiological monitoring, which is actually very much like a wearable medical device, to industrial monitors or antenna systems and whatnot that go into all kinds of other applications. So whether it's structurally integrated or a wearable device or textile integrated or all sorts of other form factors, we've seen a huge number of application spaces come through the doors.
Some of the ones I've been really excited about, you mentioned this earlier, come through that project call process, which is a very specific way to bring ecosystem, industrial-based participants together to solve some problems that we identify through the road mapping element, which is another piece. Tell us a little bit about, just at a high level, what the roadmap piece is, how that informs our project call process, and why that's helpful.
Yeah, so the roadmaps really allow us to take a look at what's the current state of the art within the field in each of 11 different areas, as well as holistically, and then really envision what the future needs to be. So, and this is coming from the companies that are trying to enable that future now. So when we look at the difference between what we want it to be and what it is today, that identifies a gap in the capability. And that might be a material, it might be a process capability, it might be having demonstrated reliability and yield. It takes a lot of different forms. And so within each of our technical working groups, we don't just identify those gaps, but we actually ask the community, ask all the participants to rank them so that we identify which ones are the highest priorities. And then further, we do that across those 11 technical working groups so that we really understand what the community sees as the priorities. And then based on that, we're able to start, developing topics for projects that would address them. And we try really hard not to be too prescriptive as to the exact form that that's going to take, because if we do that, either we're essentially identifying the performer who'd be interested in doing that work, or we could actually narrow it down to the point where we have a very specific thing that doesn't solve anybody's actual problem. And so we try to avoid doing that. Instead, we write those project topics broadly enough that we get lots of proposals against them. And then what I love about it is that we then use the community who has identified the gaps first to select the topic, the exact details of the topics, but then they also select the projects that get funded. Now, in exchange for that, the teams that get funded to do that work have to share all the information about the development activities that they're doing. So it's meant to be a pre-competitive activity. It's not product development. It's solving those gaps. And so they share the information, technical information, through reports and webinars all throughout the period of time when they're actually executing the project.
And I've been a part of uh, getting prepared to participate in a few of these and seeing the dynamics of the companies that come in, and it really is gratifying to see the introductions and the relationships that are formed as the supply chain. You can literally see the supply chain forming in the room or over the communications for how these things can be executed as material providers get it connected with equipment makers, get it connected with manufacturers, get it connected with the folks closer to the end user side. Introductions are happening, capabilities are being exchanged. And I think that really is a critical element to being able to take this hybrid electronics technology set and move that more into commercialization where it can be more broadly available.
Yeah, Stan, that's something that we've tried. We've worked really hard to do over the last 10 years, is to make sure that we're never doing anything for just one reason. So we're funding projects to solve these technical gaps, but at the same time, we're doing exactly what you said. We're trying to build the supply chain. So we strongly encourage, we don't quite require, but it's close to a requirement that the developers on these projects be teams, not just a single company, but teams that have multiple parties working together. Maybe there's no standard formula for putting together a project team, but something that's pretty common might be you've got a large company working with a university and a small company that maybe is a material or a component supplier, and maybe a tool manufacturer that's also involved in the project, a manufacturing tool manufacturer. And so they all come together and they're all doing their pieces of solving this problem and working together. And we've seen some really excellent outcomes from that, where you've got a startup company working with, say, a big defense prime, for whom it would be difficult for them to get together in say, a really large system development project that they might do, developing the next fighter jet or something like that. But through one of these projects, they go in and they're able to do some code development, test things out, figure out what works. And then we see that lead to real supply chain contracts that come out of it. So suddenly that startup company is feeding technology into the programs that either have grown out or have been kind of the de-risked to the point where now that big company is pulling the technology through and into other areas.
Yeah, and you mentioned de-risk. I want to key on that. That is such a key piece because we know that fabricating something once where we're not concerned about yield, we're not necessarily concerned about unit cost, but just getting the basic feasibility mechanics assessed. Can this be done? Needs to move on into that producibility. Do the economics work? What are the process windows around this? How robust is that process? So I think that manufacturing de-risking is such an important step to being able to successfully utilize these technologies in the field, as it were.
So exactly what you described, I would say there are other areas of de-risking that we help with as well. So for a long time, I've said that we are both blessed and cursed in this field with having such a wide variety of materials available to us. And the same is true of some of the process tools. If I want to print features, I've got well more than a dozen kind of first level choices, for how I'm going to do that. And then within every one of those, dozen or so categories, I've got multiple different tool providers and different models and things like that. And so the idea that somebody can come to us and ask for our experience with them, and we can reflect not just what we've done with our own hands, but also, here are the things we've got in reports, and this is, what so and so has seen. And by the way, would you like an introduction to actually talk with the people that are using that tool at, this company or that university, and the fact that they've all got this connection through NextFlex, kind of build some credibility. And heck, if we funded, if it's worth they've done through one of the project calls that we funded, the interested party can go in and read the reports and see what the results were. And so that's a real element of de-risking, say, capital equipment investment that somebody's going to do.
And Scott, we've talked about a lot of topics today.
Yeah.
We talked about the scope and breadth of supply chain, value chain participation. We talked about government, industry, and academic participation. We talked about de-risking. We've talked about how we pull together different types of meetings and opportunities for these groups to come together and provide service. And we talked about things that NextFlex can do directly on the fabrication project prototyping side to help individual groups move forward in their business or technology goals. Okay, so my challenge to you, how would you concisely describe the collaboration element now at NextFlex at a high level that includes and encompasses those kinds of elements?
So I would just say that we bring together all of the pieces of this hybrid electronics community, everything from the research side to the contract manufacturing to the OEMs and to all the pieces that are in between, and really serve as the connective tissue in all of that. Whether it's getting those folks together in a room to think about what the problems that need to be solved are, whether it's identifying how we're going to go about solving them. And so I would say that, if you've got a problem, a challenge, a question that's related to this field of additive and hybrid electronics, NextFlex ought to be your first call, because either we're going to know the answer or be able to connect you with the people who have that answer.
I think that's terrific. And I think that's a great pause point for our episode today. Scott, thanks for joining us. It's always a pleasure to chat and get your perspectives.
Well, thank you, Stan. It's been a lot of fun, as always.
Perfect. And I'm Stan Farnsworth. And until next time, this has been Electronics at the Edge from NextFlex.